Welcome everybody, my name's Jani Murphy and I'm here to talk to you about how to create and deliver compelling presentations. You should have a little information pack in front of you, and inside that you'll find a little handout. So that really summarises what we're going to be discussing in this session this morning. There are also a couple of other sheets there, but we'll get to those as we go through the presentation. So, question, why do most PowerPoint presentations look the same? I'm sure you know what I'm talking about here. Well, there are really two reasons. The first reason is that PowerPoint has a whole lot of standard templates built into it, which encourage the use of bullet points. Makes it very easy for people to create slide after slide filled with bullet point, and so that's what we tend to do. But the second reason is that we also want to make our presentations dual purpose. So we want to be able to use them in the presentation, but we also want them to work as a handout as well too. So we need to get that level of detail onto the slide so that the slides serve as a handout. So those two factors combined really result in a presentation where nearly every slide in the presentation looks the same. It's just the actual words and the bullet points that are changing, and presentation after presentation after presentation tends to look the same. Now, when you sit through presentations like that, and they really are conventional PowerPoint presentations, I guess, you know what the end result is. It's death by PowerPoint, yeah. And it's really so common, it's considered to be normal in organisations these days. It's what you expect when you go into a presentation. We're delivering more and more presentations every day, but they're not getting any better. They're getting less engaging. And the issue when presentations are not engaging is people don't retain the information. So if you had to estimate what percentage of a presentation people retain shortly after the presentation, what do you think it would be? Do you think it would be 75%? About half? 30%? Maybe. According to research by Dr. Carly Simon, it's actually 10%. So we really need to do something seriously to boost that retention rate, but also, and even more importantly, to control what part of the presentation the audience remembers. You want to be in control of what part they remember. They're not going to remember all of it, and if they're not going to remember all of it, what can you do in the way you structure and design your presentation to control what they do actually remember? Now, this area has been a passion of mine for a number of years, and I think it first started a few years back when I was working in the corporate environment, and I had to deliver presentations when we were rolling out new products and services and so on. And some of the presentations I developed and some I didn't. And it got to a point where as I was delivering these presentations, I could see what was happening in the audience. They were becoming increasingly disengaged as they, poor things, had to sit through more and more of these sorts of presentations. And it got to the point where I was actually really quite embarrassed. I thought, I can't stand up and continue to present these sorts of slides. So I started to do a bit of research. I read a few books, I went on a few courses, and I learnt that we now know a lot more about how the brain works, and we can use that knowledge to inform how we design, structure and design and deliver our presentations. You see, here's the thing. Nothing wrong with the software. It's not what the software does, it's what the user does. There is no problem with PowerPoint. It's how we use the tool that causes the problem. Imagine if in your organisation, every presentation you attended, the content was really well structured and it flowed. The slides were engaging and memorable, and the delivery was compelling. Wouldn't that be wonderful? I'd really like to work in that kind of organisation. So this morning I'm going to share some really exciting new ideas with you to help you structure and design compelling presentations. Now again, your handout is pretty complete, so you don't need to take notes unless you feel like you learn best by taking notes. So creating a presentation for me is a three-phase process, and I do three distinct phases. First thing, I think about the content that I'm going to include and how I'm going to structure that content to make it easy for people to remember. And it's not I feel like I've got my content on my structure well in place that I'll even think about slide design. The big mistake a lot of people make when they need to create a new presentation is they automatically leap into PowerPoint and start working out their content and doing their design all at the same time. We need to separate out those processes. decide on your content, structure your presentation, then move into your slide design. And once that's done, then I think about how I'm going to deliver the presentation. So it's not so much presentation skills, but it's more what can I do during the presentation to really help people retain this information. So I'm going to introduce you to, in each of those 3 phases, 3 techniques that will help. We're going to start with the obvious one, which is structure. And the first point to think about in structure is meaning. Why should your audience listen to you? What's in your presentation for them? I'm going to have a look at some brain rules, if you like, as we go through. And here's the first one. It's your responsibility to give the audience a reason to listen to you. If you don't create meaning for them, they'll create their own meaning, and that may not be what you want. So it's really your responsibility. You can't just stand up there and throw out that content. You've got to give your audience a reason to listen to you. You've got to create meaning for them. Now, a couple of things that you can do in this area. Firstly, I'd suggest you always start by creating a positive frame when you're introducing your topic or your workshop or whatever it happens to be. I'm sure you all recognise that painting, the most famous painting in the world, the Mona Lisa. It's worth about $750 million, I think. And it's clearly framed beautifully in a very ornate gilt frame. Now, what would your perception of the value of that painting be if instead of being framed in an ornate gilt frame, it was framed in a white plastic frame? Do you think you might view it just a little bit differently? Well, in your presentation, your content is the painting. How you frame your presentation up can determine in part the audience's initial reaction to your presentation. So at the beginning of this presentation, I didn't say, I've got a lot of information to get through, even though I have. I didn't say, some of what I'm going to say you'll find really challenging, even though you probably will. I said, I've got some exciting new ideas to talk about. So I'm putting a positive frame on it. So always start by creating a positive frame. Then, you really quickly need to establish the gap between the what is and the what if you are going to create meaning for your audience. So, the what is. You need to talk about the current situation, life as people know it in relation to whatever it is that you're talking about. Because when you start to talk about life as people know it, you're talking about something that's familiar to them, something they've experienced, something they live with, so they can start to relate and create a bond with you. So in this session, I talked about conventional PowerPoint, death by PowerPoint. And when I talk about that, everyone's going, yep, I know what you're talking about. Once you've established that, then you need to establish the what is. What's possible for people if they pay attention to what you're saying, if they take the course of action that you're recommending, if they fully understand your content. Talk about what life could be like for them. So again, in this presentation, I said, imagine working in an organisation where for every presentation you attended, the content was well structured and it flowed, the slides were engaging and memorable, and the delivery was compelling. I'd love to work in that kind of organisation. So there's your gap. Here's the what is, conventional PowerPoint, death by PowerPoint. Here's where we want to get to. Establishing that gap creates the motivation for your audience to listen to you. So you're really in control of what they think they want from your presentation. They may come in thinking one thing, but if you establish that gap really well, you can really create that meaning for them. Second point in structure is around your content. You need to segment your content. It's all very tempting when you know you've got to deliver a presentation to take everything you know about that topic and dump it into that presentation. But doing a brain dump is not conducive to learning. And here's the brain rule. This is the segmentation principle. People learn better when information is presented in bite-sized chunks. So you need to chunk or segment your presentation into 3 to 4 key points. Now the reason for 3 to 4 is that's the number of items we can hold in working memory at any one time. So if people remember nothing else about your presentation, you want them to remember your 3 to 4 key points. Now we use this idea of chunking all the time to help us remember. For example, mobile phone numbers. How many digits in a mobile phone number? 10. And when you say your mobile phone number, how do you say it? Chunks. 4. Most people say it in 4, 3, 3. So 0438 699 153. And we say it, we chunk it like that because it makes it easier for the person to remember. If I said to you, yep, my mobile phone number, 0438 699 153, you're not going to remember it. So this idea of chunking really helps us to remember. There's a patterning thing that kicks in there as well too, which again is really important in terms of memory. So the typical pattern for a mobile phone number is 433, but you probably know people that don't say their mobile phone number like that because they've got that double digit in there and they want to get that double digit together. So they'll say 043 8699. I can't even say my mobile phone number like that, but they'll chunk it differently. And when we're used to hearing 433, that can actually be very off-putting and it's very difficult to remember that phone number because, again, our brains like patterns. We are pattern seekers. We look for patterns in our environment. So it's interesting. So, segmenting your presentation into 3 to 4 key points. And then, to help embed those key points, use an agenda slide throughout your presentation. So repeat your agenda slide at the end of each key point. I use, as my agenda slide, if you like, a combination of the model at the top, the structure, the design and the plan, and then also the matrix. So I'm repeating that after each key point, which is really structure, design and plan, but also after each explanation as well too. So you'll see this pop up 9 times. So every time you see it, it's helping to embed that information into your brain. I'm using that as a memory magnet. The third point inside structure is adapting your presentation to suit different personality types. And here's the brain rule. Different personality types like to receive information in different ways. So you might be the sort of person that likes a lot of detail in a presentation, but there will be people in your audience for whom the big picture is the important thing. You might be the sort of person that makes decisions based primarily on facts, but there will be people in your audience for whom emotional considerations are more important. Now, if we have an unconscious habit of designing a presentation that appeals to us. We design the sort of presentation that we would like to receive. But if you don't take into account the other personality types, you risk losing them, alienating them. So you need to include something for everyone, if you like. So how do you know what personality types you've got in the room? Well, I'm going to introduce you to a personality profiling tool called Click Colours. Has anyone heard of Click Colours or used Click Colours before? Yeah, great, okay. Now there are a number of personality profiling tools out there. The most well-known ones are Myers-Briggs and DISC, but they're very sophisticated tools and you really need to be a qualified practitioner to administer those. Click Colours is a personality profiling tool that was developed by 2 Perth gentlemen, Greg Barnes and David Katsoukas, in the mid-2000s, and they wanted to develop a tool that organisations and teams could use that was really simple, quick, easy. Click Colours was the end result. Now in the Click Colours personality profiling tool, there are 4 personality subtypes. You are a combination of all of these, but one will shine more brightly. One will be the one that you default back to unless there is pressure on you to do otherwise. So I'm going to introduce you to them, and then inside your pack you have a sheet that describes in a little bit more detail these personality subtypes. So we're going to do a little bit of work on that, but let me introduce you to them first. Firstly, there's the analyzer. The analyzer is very analytical. The analyzer is a problem solver. Then we have the safekeeper. The safekeeper is very careful, very practical and very organised. So those 2 personality subtypes would be the left brain personality subtypes, if you like to think left brain, right brain. Then we have the player. The player is very curious, very impulsive and very playful. And the fourth one is the carer. The carer is very sensitive, very emotional and spiritual. Now again, we are a combination of all of these, but one will shine more brightly. It will be the one you default to unless there is pressure in terms of context and the situation for you to do otherwise. So what I'd like you to do is to take out that sheet, to read through, so for each of the subtypes you've got where they would be natural and comfortable and where they would feel uncomfortable, and I'd like you to rank them if you can. So put a 1 in the box next to the personality subtype that is most like you. So the easiest way to do it is to do 1 first and then do 4. Which personality subtype is least like you? And then if you can do 2 and 3, that's terrific. But at least if we can get the number 1, that would be great. So how are we going? Have we been able to get the one that you feel is most like you? How are you going, Holly? Yeah? Yeah? Okay, good. So who have we got in the room? Have we got any blues as number 1s? Have we got any analysers? Yeah, couple. Some greens, safekeepers. That would be me. Yellows? Yeah, okay. And reds? Okay. All right, interesting. So we've got a real mixture in this room. And again, we have an unconscious habit of developing the sort of presentation that we would like to receive. So we need to adapt our style. So what can we do for each of the personality subtypes? Well, for the analysers, you really need to make sure that you're quite logical. So the analysers will like lots of facts, lots of evidence in the presentation. If you can send around some pre-reading, that will really suit the analysers because they like time to reflect. And during the presentation, again, if you can give people time to reflect, that's again something that the analysers will like because they like to process, they like to think about things, think things through. The greens, the safekeepers, you need to be very organised. So you need to start on time, finish on time, have that structure so that it's flowing nicely and stick to the structure. Don't go off on tangents here or there. You'll drive the greens crazy. Can anyone relate to that? Who are the greens in the room?
I'm not a green, but I've had someone say to me, you're going from one subtopic to the next and it's not what it says here. And I'm going,
yep.
Sorry.
Yep. The greens will be going, where's that workbook? We're following through in this workbook. Yep, you should be doing this, this and this. That's the greens. And if you don't do it, you're just going to throw them right off. They're not going to be happy at all. The yellows. With the yellows, you don't want to give away too much at the beginning. Who were our yellows in the room? We had some yellow. Yeah, if you give away too much in the beginning, the yellows are going to lose interest. And you also give the yellows, you need to give the yellows lots of opportunity for question and answer, for them to voice their opinions and so on, because the yellows really like their time in the sun. They like their time to shine. And then we have the reds, and I know we had a couple of reds. So with the reds, you need to make sure that you demonstrate empathy with the audience. So the reds will be very unhappy if you put anyone down, if you use sarcasm. That's not going to sit well. You need to demonstrate empathy. Time for sharing, for group work, the reds will like that as well too. So just thinking about the things that you can do to accommodate the different personality types. So there we have it within structure: meaning, segment and adapt. So I'll give you just a minute or two to reflect on what we've talked about there and then think about how you could perhaps do something a little bit differently in your presentations. Okay, so let's move into now design. Again, 3 techniques or points to think about in design, and the first one is to signal the meaning of the slide in the title of the slide. So we tend to see titles on slides like project objectives or category headings, if you like, as the slide title. Now here's the brain rule. It's called the signalling effect. People learn better when your material is organised with clear outlines and headlines. So what we're looking for in our slide titles is really a newspaper style headline, using clear conversational language. So the title on the slide should express the main idea on the slide. Now, if you're having trouble working out what the main idea of a slide is, look at your slide, then look away and tell someone else, or even just to yourself, say, what's the main idea of that slide? And that should be your headline. So in the newspaper on the sports page, if the headline in the article after the local derby was football results, you're not going to read it. You want to read a headline that tells you exactly what went on during that match. So that's what your slide title should do. It should tell your audience exactly what that slide is about. Then simplicity is absolutely key when it comes to slide design. This is the coherence principle. People learn better when extraneous material is excluded rather than included. So the bottom line is, never add anything to the slide that doesn't add to the meaning of the slide. If it doesn't add to the meaning, it shouldn't be on the slide. Slide real estate is limited. You want to make sure everything that's on there adds to the meaning. Now, we process information in two channels, the visual channel and the verbal channel. So we use the visual channel in our brains to process anything that's presented to the eye. So that means text on the screen, graphics, videos, images. They're all processed by the eye. The verbal channel processes anything that's presented to the ear. So that's me speaking. You're processing that through your verbal channel. Now, due to the processing constraints that our minds have, we can't pay attention to two things at once. You force people to choose. If you put up a slide that's got lots of text and then you start talking, you force them to choose. They can't do two things at once. Now, we don't want to overload the visual processing channel. So that means you need to keep your text on slide minimal, and then you talk. So when I put that slide up there now, no one is listening to me. You are all reading that information on the slide. You cannot do both. And you can read faster than I can talk, so you will be reading that on that slide and not listening to me. So to avoid that, what we can do is take what's called the 3-word challenge and reduce each bullet point to 3 words or as close to 3 words as you can. So if we go back to the previous slide, I've also changed the slide title from more of a category heading to a headline, and then each of my bullet points is reduced to 3 words. Now, the benefits of doing this in terms of your audience, and you are looking for benefits for your audience, not for you. This is great for you because all the information's up there, but it's lousy for your audience. This is much better for your audience, and it means you need to be really familiar with your content. 3-wording your bullet points doesn't mean that your audience won't get, well, it doesn't excuse you from fleshing out those bullet points. It actually demands that you flesh them out. If you don't explain those bullet points, your audience is not going to get the benefit of that information. 3-wording your bullet points gives you a much friendlier slide. I can put that slide up, give you a few seconds to absorb it. You could read that slide in 7 to 10 seconds. Once you've read it, I can then start talking and you'll be willing to pay attention to me. Really important. So what you end up with is slides that have minimal text on them because we don't want to overload the visual processing channel. Then what you want to say when that slide is presented should go into your notes page inside PowerPoint. You type it into your notes page. Then using a simple export command out of PowerPoint, you can export your notes pages out to Microsoft Word. And Microsoft Word will create a table for you. And in that table, you'll have a thumbnail of the slide. And in this column here, you'll have anything that you typed into the notes column. So there's your script. And potentially there's your handout as well too. So again, we don't want to overload the visual processing channel. So minimal text on the slide. Type what you want to say into the notes area. Export it out to Microsoft Word. Create your script. So I have a full script in my other bag. This is a cut down version, but I have one for every single program that I run. I have a script. And then you need to rehearse. You need to practice so that you feel really confident with your material. Still staying with simplicity, we need to get rid of slide junk. So what's slide junk? Well, we're talking about any logos, branding that appears on every slide. A presentation is not a report. It shouldn't have a logo on every slide. Now, this is a bit difficult, I know, in some organisations where it's set as a standard. But logos, branding should be on your bumper slides only, on your first slide and your last slide. And in fact, I wouldn't even have it on the first slide. I'd make the first slide a really engaging slide that gets people engaged the minute they walk into the room. Then the next slide should be the slide that's got the branding on it, the title of the presentation and so on. So logos should be on front and last slides only, and then use your colours. Use your colour scheme to reflect the branding of the organisation. We don't want any slide numbers, we don't want any dates. Slide numbers, nothing worse than walking in and seeing, you know, slide 1 of whatever number it happens to be. Luckily, we don't see that terribly much anymore. So get rid of all that slide junk. Standard templates, really, if you are using standard templates, really watch that they're not too busy. The backgrounds are not too busy because they can distract from any graphics that you tend to use. Animation, which is another piece of information that has to be processed. Only use animation if it adds meaning. So this is movement on the slide. If you use animation for the sake of animating something, people will pay attention to the movement and not the meaning. There is another reason that you can use animation, and that's to control the flow of information. So you know when you're doing a bullet point build, but quite frankly, if you're 3-wording your bullet points, you don't need to. Put it all up, let people read it, let them know what's coming, and then talk and explain. The other kind of movement is transitions. So transitions is the movement between the slides. And I'm sure, unfortunately, you've probably all experienced those PowerPoint presentations where there's a transition between every slide and you come out of there feeling like, oh my God, you're sort of almost feeling motion sick. There's been so much movement. I do use some transitions, but usually only between key points. So that's the 3 or 4 key points. I might have a transition there, but really keep them to a minimum. Third point within design is about being visual. So, brain rule, the picture superiority effect. The more visual input becomes, the more likely it is to be recognised and recalled. Vision is our dominant sense. It trumps all other senses. We are primarily visual thinkers. In part because reading's actually quite inefficient for us. When we read, we have to look at each of the characters. We see each of the characters as a little picture, and we have to interpret them all and then put it all together. Whereas we see an image, we can immediately get meaning from the image. So vision is definitely our dominant sense. If you hear a piece of information 3 days later, you'll remember 10% of it. Add an image, you'll boost that to 65%. That's according to Dr. John Medina, who wrote a book called Brain Rules. So what we want are strong, powerful images on our slides. Now let's have a look at this slide. And I'm going to work on this slide and transform this. It's unfortunately a fairly typical slide. Even as I'm talking, I know you're reading it. The actual content itself doesn't really matter terribly much, but you can see we've got a category heading, we've got some bullet points, and goodness me, we've got sub-bullet points as well too, and we've got a little tiny postage size image. So we can transform that. First thing we're going to do is 3-word those bullet points. So just identify the key words in each of the bullet points and change that category heading to more of a headline. Got that little postage size image sitting on the right-hand side, not so good. Let's increase that up. So already we've got a much more impactful slide, but we've got a bit of a problem with that image. If you use images of people, whatever direction their eyes are looking in, that's where your audience will look. So this gentleman's looking across there, so that's where you're all looking. And I really want you to look at the text itself. So we just need to swap that around. Now it works quite nicely because he's actually looking at the headline on the slide, so that's working really well. So that would be one way, and that would be perfectly acceptable as a slide in terms of your visual image and so on. We can get even more impact and increase retention even more if we integrate the text and the image. So now we're doing better again. Now with this is just simply a shape that's been made transparent, and then the text box sits over the top of that. So having the shape sitting behind the text box just helps the text to pop out a bit, because in lots of your images, the background of the image causes too much conflict with the text itself. So just a shape, transparent, text over the top. Really, really simple techniques. So we go from that to that. Very simple techniques. We saw this slide earlier where we 3-worded the slide. If we add in a powerful image, and then just even using some very subtle animation. Much more powerful slide, much more powerful. Then if your content is a bit more not able really to be represented visually, it's difficult to do because of the nature of your content, one technique that you can use, so you've got to use really the idea of bullet points, but chunk them horizontally rather than vertically. The eye wants to read left to right. We like to go across left to right, not down. So if we take that slide, for example, and rather than having the bullet points coming down, chunk them across. Just a very simple technique again. And then if you want to add in a layer of interest, you can put these in shapes and put some shadows on them, and it's just, you know, simple techniques. So, within design, the 3 areas that we've looked at. Again, I'll give you a minute or two to have a bit of a think about that, and just think if there's anything that you think immediately that you could implement, that you could do, that would make your slides more engaging. Anything that pops into anyone's mind? 3-word, yeah. That's great. And you'll find you'll just feel so much happier when you put that slide up, because you'll know that people are not going, oh God, you know, so much happier. Anything else?
The impact of the visual one,
It's really clear when you see one slide being transformed like that, isn't it? Yeah. And again, really simple techniques. Terrific. Okay, we need to move on. Let's have a look at planning now. The first point in planning is you need to use the pause. Presenters don't have to talk all the time. And here's the brain rule. For information transfer to take place, the first half is presenting, but then you need to give people time to take that information in. So when should you pause? After you've changed your slide. Now again, slides are glance media. You should be able to comprehend the meaning of a slide in between 7 to 10 seconds. So you put that slide up, you pause for a few seconds, give people to absorb the meaning of the slide, and then you start talking. If you start talking while they're still reading the slide, people have gone into cognitive overload. After you've asked a question is a great time to pause. So ask the question and just pause. It gives people time to think. You could also, and it's always a good idea to have a question prepared yourself. So, what questions do you have is the best way to ask for questions, not does anyone have any questions, because that kind of implies, well, I've explained it all to you, you couldn't possibly have any questions, but what questions do you have encourages people to ask questions, and then say something along the lines of, a question I'm often asked is, and that again gives people time to think about what questions they may have. After handing out information, always important to pause after you've handed out information, because what are people going to do when you hand out information? They're going to read it. They're going to read it. So if they're reading and you're talking, guess what? They're not listening to you because they can't. They have to choose what they're going to pay attention to, and they'll go with reading the information. And after key words, if you make, or an important statement, if you make an important point, stop. Just for a few seconds. Give people time to think about it. Just helps to embed it. Second point inside planning is varying the delivery during your presentation. This comes from Dr. John Medina. Every 10 minutes you need to do something emotionally relevant to reset the attention. It could be as simple as blacking out the slide and asking a question. Or it could be moving to a whiteboard, it could be telling a story, it could be getting people to share, it could be getting people to think about and reflect on, something to mix it up so it's not just you talking constantly. Every 10 minutes doing something relevant. People really don't pay attention to boring presentations. And we're all sick and tired of boring presentations. Every 10 minutes, try and do something to change it up. So this is what you should be planning for in that planning phase. Think about how you're actually going to present. And the final point is process. The brain rule. People need time to process. Some people process better by talking, some by thinking, some by writing, and some by applying. So you need to build in those times in your presentation. Now, interestingly enough, each of our personality subtypes will have a preference for processing in a particular way. Not surprisingly, the blues want to think. They like time to reflect and to analyse. Who are the greens in the room? I know we had a few greens. How do you process? I reckon you, yeah, I know I do. I write. I take copious notes. If I'm reading a book, I'm writing. Yeah, the greens want to write. The yellows are more than likely going to want to apply. They're going to want to do something. And the reds will be happy to talk and to collaborate. So if you can build in those sorts of opportunities into your presentation, you're really catering for everyone there. If you can manage to combine processing time with movement, that's a real win-win, because when we start to move around, the blood flows, the brain's really engaged. So getting people to move into groups, if you're asking people to think about a number of options and make a choice out of a number of options, having some cards up in the corners of the room that correspond to the options, getting people to move to those places and discuss in those places. If you're asking people to agree or disagree on something that you're talking about, putting a line of masking tape on the floor, mark the middle point, one end's agree, one end's disagree, and getting people to come and stand on the line as to where they think they fit and then talk from that position. Anything you can do to get people up and moving is a really good thing. In a slightly longer version of this presentation for the click colours, I'd have the posters up in the corners of the room and I'd get people to move to the corner of the room and talk from that point of view. So anything you can do to get people moving. So there we have it. Within planning, pause, vary and process. So there we have it. 3 techniques within each of the areas for creating an engaging presentation. So now I'm going to pause for about 10 seconds and ask you, what questions do you have? And here's an example. A question I'm often asked is, and this is actually a really important point to make, how many slides should you have in a presentation? That comes up all the time. Now, if I was to ask you, how many slides do you think you've seen up to this point? What does it feel like you've seen?
25.
Yeah. I think this is slide 76 or 77. Wow. Something like that, is that right? You can see it at the back, yeah.
Is it?
Yeah. 74, slide 74. And yet if I'd said to you, okay, in this presentation I'm going to be showing you 80 slides, you'd be going, get me out of here. This is not going to be fun. The number of slides doesn't count. The number of slides is not important. It's what's on your slides that count. And that's a really important thing to remember. Not the number of slides, it's what's on your slides that count. So if I'm just going to wrap up quickly, we understand that conventional PowerPoint just equals no engagement whatsoever. So we really need to change the way that we're doing things. Now, it will pay off, but it's not necessarily going to be easy. And the challenges for each of the personality subtypes will be, for the blues, you need to include less detail in your presentation. The greens, and this is my challenge, it's always about more interaction, because the greens are very happy with structure, process, but we need to interact more. For the yellows, maybe a little bit more planning, and I'd suggest for the reds, some more evidence. They are the challenges for the personality subtypes, but I would really encourage you to give it a go, to make the jump. Because although it takes more time to plan the presentation and design the slides, when you're up there delivering it and you're feeling really happy and really confident with the slides that you're using, it just really makes all of that time worthwhile. So thank you very much, everyone.
Authorised by the Government of Western Australia, Perth.